Hello and welcome to Upfront on the Voice of America. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, experts say that one of the most pressing issues during times of crisis, like war, like famine, and all other types of conflict, is the disruption of education systems. Schools may close, traditional modes of learning become difficult to sustain, displaced youth face immense challenges in accessing educational resources, and the already marginalized often bear the brunt of these disruptions, which exacerbates existing inequalities. A new report recently written by Marc Sommers and his team talks about some of these issues and how it can be fixed. Marc joins me in studio today. Marc, thank you so much for coming to visit us again. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
So tell me about this report, Lost Opportunity.
So Lost Opportunity, Education for Out-of-School Youth in Emergency and Protracted Crisis Settings. That's the title. It is about this situation where there's 250 million children and youth who are not in school in today's world. 127 million of them are in crisis-affected countries. And so you have huge numbers of primary school and secondary school age young people who can't go to school. Mm-hmm. So this has been bothering me for a long time, going to places and seeing all these young people not in school and, feeling pretty lost. And so I got some interest with some emergency education experts, and we got funding from NORCAP, which is part of the Norwegian Refugee Council. And we were able to write this study, Lost Opportunity, about this huge crisis that's often overlooked.
And what are some of the recommendations you make in the study?
Well, one of them is that there's no definition for who a youth is. There's no agreed definition, which is a problem. If you can't define the population, it's hard to address it. There's also an issue that there isn't targeting that's strategic for different parts of the youth population. So if you don't do that, then most youth don't have a chance of getting in. And I think for a lot of young people, they move around, they work, their parents, all sorts of things are going on in these crisis environments. So there has to be some flexibility also in order to for them to make it possible for them to continue their education.
Now, beyond the physical disruptions of them going to school, what are some of the psychological disruptions or effects or impact they have for their failure to attend school?
Well, I mean, what's your future without education? What are you going to do without education? Who's going to guide you? Where are your mentors? I think kids get quite lost and they have a challenge moving forward without that sort of sense of hope. Education really gives you not only protection, but a sense of a future trajectory, that you're moving forward with your life. And when that's taken away, then you're sort of on your own. So one of the things that happens is that a lot of young people leave refugee camps or places for internally displaced and go to cities. And emergency education doesn't follow them there. They're usually they stay mostly primary education. They stay in refugee camps or in rural areas, and the kids are on their own.
And when they move to these cities, they don't necessarily continue education.
It's not available most of the time for most kids.
So they fall in the cracks because there are no safety nets by the governments, by NGOs. Why is it that there are now no available resources to cater to this population?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the things is that the education and emergencies field is very focused on primary education, which is the starting point for education. The problem is that it doesn't build out much. When we did our research, we had to interview a lot of people, and there just isn't much youth expertise in the field, according to education experts in the field. And so there's not an understanding of who these people are and what, in educational terms, they actually need. So and no matter how long a crisis goes on, such as in Yemen, such as in South Sudan,
in Sudan right now,
the emergency education system generally doesn't build out. And so it doesn't become a system beyond primary education with some differences, but in generally speaking, there just won't be a secondary school of vocational education. It's just not there, and that's the challenge.
And what impact does this have on society, that you have millions or thousands of young people that are not, of school-going age, that are just sitting idle?
Well, I mean, there are efforts for girls' education to try to get girls to stay in school, but the focus of girls' education is largely on pre-adolescent girls. And trying to persuade them, one of the things is to not get married, to not get pregnant. But in many situations, the chances of a young person, a young female youth, of getting pregnant and becoming a parent is actually pretty high. And so what about that huge population? They can't go to school. There isn't that girls' education doesn't really, generally speaking, doesn't include them.
Doesn't factor them in.
And then with the issues of boys' education, so boys are leaving school across the globe. It's a global crisis. And that issue is not even on the radar in this field.
Right.
So if you break it down in terms of gender, it's quite concerning.
But again, what does it have, the impact it has on society? I mean, some of these young people become drivers of some of the conflicts that we see.
Well,
what does it mean for the society itself?
Well, we have stereotypes about male youth as being dangerous. And the facts just, the actual realities don't back it up. Most youth are peaceful no matter what. Most youth resist engagement in joining gangs, joining violent extremist groups, joining insurgent groups. But of course some do. The overwhelming majority won't, but some do, and that becomes a focus. So I think more than joining some of these violent groups, I think they're more just lost. And I mean, there's a lot of drinking that goes on, there's drug use, there's, trying to find a way forward in the informal sector. It's a hard life, and you're not really looked on with much respect. For female youth, they're unmarried mothers quite often. What do you do? That's not a person that has much of a standing in society. So generally they stay sort of sidelined, or they're really not in view. So these are kind of invisible people.
With unrealized potential. Now
and children.
Absolutely. You've interacted with some of them, in your work.
Yes, I have.
As a writer. What are some of their stories? What are some of the things they tell you?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that life goes on, life moves on, and education doesn't move with them. So you have a big problem where, there are certain priorities in life. In order for education to be part of that, education has to be flexible. Education has to meet the demands that they have, right? For an unmarried mother, a child wife, she's going to need daycare. If you're working as a boy or a girl, if you're working, then you have to have flexible hours to allow that person to go to school. And then there might be certain certain subjects that they really need more than others. So that flexibility and that sort of understanding your population, who you're talking to, who you want to encourage to join in school, you have to understand their priorities in order to get them back into education.
Who do you hope reads this report, and what do you want them to do?
That's a wonderful question. I want everybody to read it. And because I think that this is a priority that just where there's no money, so I want donors to read it, governments to read it, so that they can start realizing you have these young citizens. Let's figure out creatively how to get them back into education, because that's best for them, it's best for the society, it's best for nations, regions, it's best for the world. So how do we work together? How do we learn from young people? What are their education priorities, and how do we get them included more in the education system? We got to bring them back in, and we have to listen to them and find out what they want in education, in order for them to come back and join us, in the broader society.
Now, in terms of crises or conflicts, whether it's governments or NGOs, in terms of response, they're thinking, humanitarian aid, feeding people, finding shelter for
That's
them.
right.
Education is really not top of the agenda. How would they incorporate education as part of their response mechanism?
Well, let's think about this. What if you don't? If you don't have education for young people, the chances of there being more problems in terms of health, in terms of stability and security, they're going to skyrocket. And also you don't have a connection with young populations. And it's good to remember that in places where these emergencies are taking place, these are some of the youngest populations in human history. So we're not paying attention to, we're not listening to, we're not reaching out to and learning from members of the overwhelming majority of young people, of populations that are affected by crisis. And that dynamic has to change in order for us to really improve society and have an opportunity to connect with these young people who really are reaching out and saying, you know, accept me. I want an opportunity. Please give me one.
Right. Marc Sommers, thank you so much, and we hope you come and visit us again.
Thank you very much, Jackson. It's great to be here.
Thanks.